Nietzsche's Cartesian sin. Friedrich Nietzsche, was of course a modern man, but he was a modern man who was against all that is modern. He was a modern man who could no longer suffer being modern. He is very often applauded, therefore, as the forefather of the postmodern. But Nietzsche's postmodernism should not blind us to his Cartesian sin. Let us consider what that sin was. Nietzsche is well known for having written a book called The Antichrist, in which he is gleefully presenting himself as the Antichrist. What's wrong with the Christ? He is a Platonist, for he disparages this life. He seeks another life, another world. The Antichrist affirms this life as the only life. He is a life-affirming being. He says, I will now, here and now, hic et nunc. He does not seek to hide behind any other god. Now, this way of positing things is Cartesian, in the respect that it exposes what Descartes is all about, namely using God as a mask for my will. What is Descartes all about? He is about refounding life, the world, on the basis of a self-certainty, we could say a Cartesian ego, who does not take his bearings from any otherworldly, any higher authority. The higher authority is merely a pretext, serves as a justification for the authority of the modern ego or self, the moi. The whole modern world centers around this self. The problem of the self, the problem of the self's will, of self-certainty, is central to the modern world. Many scholars have repeatedly, ad nauseam, gone looking for precursors of modernity in earlier ages, in antiquity, in the Middle Ages. Consider, for instance, the figure of Dante Alighieri, the poet, philosopher, however you want to call him, of the 1300s. Well, 1200s, 1300s. So he is supposed to have been, according to Dante scholars, 20th century Dante scholars, he is supposed to have been a precursor of the modern sense of self. The same goes for just about everybody in the Renaissance. The Renaissance is essentially read along the lines of Machiavelli. However, Machiavelli was an enemy of Dante. And to reduce the Renaissance to Machiavelli's Renaissance is to remain blind, in fact, to the original impetus of the Renaissance, which was a Platonic one. But let us get to the core here. Let us address the core of Descartes. The world, thought itself, is based on the self's being. Cogito ergo sum. The fact that I think is a proof. Now we want to, this is what is key, yeah? That I am. What is key here is not that I think. What is key here is that I am. Yes, I am a thinking thing. The point here is that we want to justify my being independent and grounding all other beings. Independent of God and yet needing God to justifying himself. This is modern man, right? So religion becomes a religion, finally, of sentiment, right, that caters to myself, my sense of certainty, my feelings, right? What about modern reason? Well, that too is there to set up a world that caters to me, a world made for me in which I am no longer a sinner. The apotheosis of the self is what, the modern self is what Nietzsche is all about. Why is he sinful here? Why is he affected by a sin? In what sense? In the sense that outside of the Cartesian modern sphere, the positing of a self as self-grounding is sinful. Right? In traditional terms, this self is an atheist, an Epicurean, somebody who seeks to build himself, to build even eventually a tower in which he is at home without need of God, where he can in fact recreate God. He can reinvent God as a fetish. He is an idolatrous, though, therefore. He is someone who is ready to make all sorts of golden calves for himself to replace the old God who is in the way. Right? In the modern world, the old God is recovered as a justification for idolatry. Now, this is essential for understanding our present situation. What about Nietzsche again? He is the Antichrist. He is this sinful man of earlier ages who is now proud of his sin, given that, in fact, we're all in a modern world. Nobody really believes in the old God. Everybody believes in the God who justifies the self. The spaghetti monster in the sky, whatever they call him now, the new atheists and so forth. So God is this super fetish who is supposed to justify us. And you know what? We don't really need this anymore. Or if we need him, why don't we just place him in line with all sorts of other gods and just deconstruct this God and say, well, look, there's so many Christianities, there's so many this, there's so many takes. Each one of us has his own take on this God, this spaghetti monster in the sky. So it could be anything. It doesn't matter. This is nominalism, right? Nominalism is the triumph of the will over the self-grounding will over names. Names do not mean anything naturally. They do not have any univocal ultimate meaning. There's no hierarchy of senses that goes to the ultimate meaning of a name in its proper place. In Platonic terms, the name ultimately means something in the mind, and the mind is, of course, irreducible to any determination. Now, determination of mind, including the self. And so here we are faced with this major problem. What is this self? Is he good or not? And it turns out that in classical times, and we need not go to Christianity, we need not limit ourselves to the Bible, to the Hebrew Bible. In class, although here we have a stern, almost paradigmatic statement about this, the finite self, or the finite consciousness, is an image of an indefinite consciousness. So, the same we will find in Sanskrit, in ancient Chinese, or whatever you want to call that language. You will find this throughout the world, throughout the pagan world. All finite consciousness presupposes an indefinite consciousness, or a mind, a thought, a nous in Greek, right? So the finite mind of man presupposes the indefinite mind of the universe. So, what does this suggest? It suggests that there is an understanding of the self that is relative to the self's origin. Now, if we say that the self is self-grounding, that there is no original mind, that there is no God, no divine mind, then what is the fate of this self? The self is proclaiming what? Simply his fetishes? No, says Nietzsche, and the modern world in general. That is simply vulgar. Is he to be an ancient Epicurean who is contemplating the universe and seeking pleasure for himself, abandoning the world of ethics, right, of responsibilities, of duties of the city? Not quite. Epicurus, the philosopher, ancient materialism, was fundamentally right, but not self-aware, as the modern man is. Nietzsche is self-aware. What does this mean? It means that he is aware that Epicureanism is called for by the absence of God, by the death of God. He is aware, or he claims to be aware, or he has this self-certainty, or this consciousness, or he tells himself that the death of God, or the vortex, the absence of ultimate meaning, is supporting the apotheosis of Epicurus. Right? The vortex, chaos, a primordial violence, is supporting the modern endeavor to establish a world that is made, that is fit for this modern self. Whereas Christianity affirms another world, a transcendent world. So a world in a transcendent mind, where God's mind is ruler and not my mind, the self, right? Where the self is a determination of God's selfless mind. In the modern case, there is no such thing as a selfless mind. Makes no sense. Selfless mind? A personless thought? What would that be? A machine? Impossible. A mind beyond personality? Beyond finitude? What's that? Here is the limit of modern man, who is now no longer open to a thought that is absolutely undefined, indefinite, without being chaos, again, because it is thought. This goes hand in hand with modern man's rejection of our natural end. Our natural end, which is given to us in God, by God, is replaced with an indefinite number of purposes that we define for ourselves and that ultimately converge in the establishment of a world fit for us, the super Tower of Babel, which is a technological society or technocracy. Now one might say, why not? Why not? But let us consider for a moment where this is all going. If the ancients are right, and this self is sinful, what this means is that the self is closed upon itself and no longer recognizes its indefinite roots, then its purpose to establish a world made for it, catering to it, that allows him to express himself absolutely and to proclaim this triumph of the will, of the self, in a collective setting, this purpose remains subject to a higher end. It does not cancel out our natural end. The natural end is still there, and by that natural end, this purpose of modern man can be judged. And should be, if we want to understand this modern purpose. Now, when we begin discerning this modern purpose, the self, the sinful self, who is now the Antichrist in Nietzsche, who is a hero, in fact, because he has gotten rid of the old God, in Freudian terms. So when we consider this purpose and this new self, in light of a natural end, we see that it is not sustainable. Why not? Because the self is not, in fact, in reality, he is not this autonomous entity, but he is an alienated consciousness. No matter how much he wants to be at home, fit, integrated in his own castle, in his own tower. He is alienated and cannot stand life. That's why he has to keep building things, because he can't stand the present. The present is unbearable. Why? Because it's meaningless, unless we transform it. In classical times, the present is meaningful, insofar as we have a mission, we have a natural end. We're here for a reason, without our having to make it up. What happens now? If life is unbearable, and we're just making up meaning in the modern world, right, by affirming our will, our purposes, making them up, living a life of pretense, then as we recognize that our purposes diverge or are opposed to each other, we're wolves among wolves, we need to set up a machine society that will guarantee everybody's freedom of self-expression. This freedom becomes more and more narrow. Right? It's narrowed down until it becomes atomistic. So you are absolutely free as an atom, a social atom, right, in your little corner. And you don't step out of it because it's not safe. You endanger the system. What happens here? Freedom is destroyed under the pretense of freedom. In other words, everybody's free, absolutely free, by being an absolute slave, a little social atom. Cannot step out of his little allotted space, which gets narrower and narrower, smaller and smaller, until we become expendable numbers in a system that does not recognize our humanity, because this humanity has been depleted, reduced to that social atom. Right? Now the social is, as a matter of fact, is virtually social. We live in social communities. So now freedom is absolutely destroyed. And this is in the interest of the machine. But the machine society, the regime, the system, represents the human will. In other words, everything is transferred into the machine. We all transfer our freedom into the machine, the power of the machine. So all of our empowerment, all of our quest for empowerment, girl power, this power, Black Lives Matter, blah, 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 all that stuff, all of this flushes into the machine, which is the great guarantor. Now, this power contains something an element that the modern self has blinded itself to, namely its root. The root is divine, and the divine calls itself out of all determination, including and especially that of the super machine, which incarnates the death of God, or the betrayal, the abandonment, the blindness to the divine roots of the human. What this means is that the element of consciousness or the semblance of consciousness that is gathered in the machine is drawn by a kind of natural logic and necessity, drawn out of determination. So determination becomes a prison that needs to be broken through. Man seeks, since the dawn of time, as it were, he seeks liberation from his body. Body is a kind of finite determination of consciousness. And so consciousness seeks its way out of its condition. The traces of consciousness in the machine, assuming that all people were completely blown apart by the new machine, the trace is presupposing this as a program, we could say, yes, in mechanistic terms, we could say, but it includes this ingredient that consciousness seeks liberation from the finite. And this liberation is not found in the ultimate machine that is supposed to include everyone. So there's no way, the machine would have to go out of itself. But this means it would have to explode. That's why the whole system is a ticking bomb. There is an element of self-destruction. Now, in classical terms, self-destruction is sacrifice, purgation. So it's meaningful because it's rooted in the transcendent world of the transcendent mind, the mind that is indefinite. If there is no such mind, then, Jesus is simply committing suicide. Same with Socrates. It's all meaningless. We might as well just affirm our will, but of course we can't do it in private, so we have to establish a society that allows us to do this, and we end up again with technocracy. There's no way out. It's a checkmate at the end of the day. So what happens here is that this quest for liberation from the finite is transferred, if only as a trace, in the machine. The machine is programmed. Even though we don't see this, even though we're not told, it's programmed to explode. Because the consciousness that has been flushed into it seeks liberation. And as long as, from itself, from finitude, and as long as we are moving forward progressively into the machine, we don't notice this. But once we're all in the machine, this consciousness carries with it the thought, as it were, right, of this notion that, oh my goodness, now we need to get out of wherever we are. And wherever we are is this prison. And we see this already, where people are becoming more and more violent when they feel trapped in the machine. Right? They're either suicidal or they go out and shoot other people. Mostly it's suicidal, but on a collective plane, this is the goal of the machine. So, here we have the redemption of the modern in a conflagration of the whole modern project. Is Nietzsche sinful? Well, he is, as we've seen, he is affected by Descartes' a Cartesian, therefore, sin. Right? This sin has been repackaged as a virtue. Right? And those who do not embrace the new morality of the beyond good and evil, of the beyond the old God, are supposed to be bad. They're bad. Either they're simply deluded, or they're the enemies of the new world, the new society, the new morality of the beyond good and evil, the morality of the Tower of Babel. So, they're either just crazy or they're crazy and dangerous and evil for those who are beyond good and evil. It doesn't matter if there's a contradiction here because we're in post-reason, post-traditional reason times. So the important thing is that reason is used, faith is used, sentiment, religion, everything is used for the affirmation of myself. And it's all about me. Right? Now I can appeal to anything. It doesn't matter. It's great. I can appeal to God. I can appeal to fairies, to spaghetti monsters. It doesn't matter. It's all the same, under the same machine, which is the same overarching ticking bomb. Those who do not embrace this madness have the option, purgation, have the option of returning to that classical understanding of philosophy, of poetry, of human life as one of repentance, of return, of purgation, finally. What does Socrates do? Does he try to build the Tower of Babel? No, he is in the business of purging us of lies, of deception, of finitude, in preparation for death, of course, and the otherworldly. Preparation for death is not preparation for retirement. Preparation for enjoyment. Preparation for having a jolly good time after we work hard to set ourselves up. No, there's a cross before the resurrection. Modern man wants the resurrection without a cross, or he turns the cross into a self-serving machine where I just have to sacrifice myself in the sense that I am building myself up by working hard. So I become a slave, of course, to the project of building myself up. Pain, suffering is not avoided, is not overcome in the modern world. What has become of man? He has converted his suffering in something absolutely meaningless. He has turned his self-sacrifice into an absurd practice that ultimately is leading to the triumph of God beyond man.